having that communication and collaboration in a space where everyone feels comfortable and safe.
Yeah.
I think that's the starting point of the dialogue, of bringing people together.
Hello and welcome to the season 2 of Understanding the Future. I'm your host Punit Gandhi, and Climate Center for Cities is excited to bring to you a podcast about the future of work in the field of climate change, urban development, sustainability, and innovation. We will talk to experts working on ground as well as in the top management of government and non-governmental organizations to better understand how their field looks like in future. This will help us in preparing to enable climate actions as well as gauge the type of skill sets and jobs that would be required in future to solve complex challenges. If you are listening to it for the first time, do tune into season 1.
Hello and welcome to the season 2 of Understanding the Future. I'm your host Punit Gandhi, and today we have with us Ms. Nupur Prothi Khanna. She is the founder and principal at the Beyond Build Pvt Limited. She will help us better understand the topic of inclusive cities. Welcome to the show, Ms. Nupur.
Thank you, Puneet. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for taking our time. And so let's start our conversation with the first basic question. That is, what do we exactly mean by inclusive cities?
I think I've been working with this whole idea of definitions and theories, and I just feel an inclusive city for me is where every child feels safe, happy, and feels a sense of ownership that this is their own, his or her own. I mean, that's how I define it. And I use children for a specific purpose because I think they haven't yet been adulterated by others' understandings. They have a more commonsensical and pure intuitive element. So yeah, that's how I define it for myself, at least.
Okay, because so whenever we read about inclusive cities anywhere, and while doing research about this podcast as well, some of the things that come up as soon as we search of inclusive cities is slum upgradation, and I that is where like how would you tell that process different than this process of your definition?
So, Puneet, when I told you this definition or this explanation, which is more for myself, I had primarily children from marginalized communities in mind.
Okay,
Our children in general have facilities, all safety.
yeah,
I always say that they open their mouth, the food appears. They think of something and the game appears, and they want something and that appears. It's for them, it's magic. They
yeah,
don't even have to lift the wand, but things appear. But for children from communities where their parents don't have the opportunity to make things appear for them,
yeah,
they still retain a very basic sense of needs and not wants. And I
yeah,
think safety and for a child to take ownership of a space are basic needs. They're not wants.
hmm,
They're not wants of society. They're needs of a society, and it's the society's duty to
hmm,
actually deliver these needs to these children, or fulfill these needs for children. That they
yeah,
should be able to walk out, play wherever they're playing without the mother having to keep an eye on them. They should be able to cross streets. They should be able to go to school.
yeah,
We a lot of times in our geographies, we've made a big deal out of it. That
yeah,
they need to children. These are basics. These are not a next level luxury. And every city that's not able to provide this to their children, which is many cities around the
true,
world, just need to rethink. Because if you're aspiring for inclusive cities, well, here it is. This is what an inclusive city is. A city
true,
where these children can be safe, own it, walk to school, not feel like they are living in someone else's city just because they
yeah,
are migrating from elsewhere. Or, city is for everyone. A city is for migrants. It's always been that way.
yeah. Yeah, I do agree because major part of any big city or whenever a city is growing, it's growing because there is a lot of migrant population from all age group that comes up. and eventually those kids settle there and grow there and own those parts of the city. So I do agree with you over there that how children need to be put at the center of this. But while we are talking about this, how do we make sure, and so what are the general challenges that comes up for children, especially the marginalized children, and because they don't have access to grounds, like let's take something as Bombay or Delhi. They are megapolis, I'll put it that way, but they don't have enough space, they don't have enough safety. So what general kind of challenges do we see growing up that that will cause to those children?
See, I'll tell you, there are a couple of things actually. One is that when we look at something from a child's perspective, we usually look at something from an environmentalist's, urban planners, landscape architect's perspective.
Yeah,
But that's what we are reflecting on them.
yeah,
I don't think they see their environment the way we reflect their environment, the way we see their environment, and the way we put titles on it, the way we put names, and we give it a nomenclature, and then we give it an emotion, and we give it then a policy, and then I don't think children see it that way actually.
okay,
So we've been doing a project across with Sweden funding in India, and we are working with children of marginalized communities, and we're getting them to write stories about their immediate environment. And
yeah,
they write it with a certain matter of fact sort of a style because that's
yeah,
their life, that's their environment. They are
yeah,
not analyzing it.
yeah,
They are not thinking about it the way we are giving it. So when you say challenges, you know what the challenges are. The challenges are hygiene. The challenges are water, access to clean drinking water, access to toilet facilities. But when you look at it and you ask the children what the challenges are, they put the challenges in such a different way. I mean, one of the
mhm,
challenges one child said was, all the time I'm playing without slippers, and now because of Corona, I have to wear slippers and go out. I mean, which urban planner is going to think of that as being a challenge for which we use pavements? And, I mean, we don't think like that, right?
yeah,
Children are thinking of, we think of water pollution.
yeah,
For them, they look at it as a place. It's the waterfront. It's the place next to the nala. It is something that they play in. One of the main challenges that children have highlighted in all of these stories, which for
yeah,
me was a revelation,
yeah,
is smell. They
okay,
define everything around them from the perspective of smell. They
interesting,
describe water as smell.
wow,
They describe plants as smell. They describe moving from one part of their neighborhood into another part as smell. And which platform digitally is actually addressing that, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I think planning has to. The reason we have gone seeking children, I mean, it's not been an accident. It's been very, very strategic and deliberate.
okay,
Is that around us something is going wrong? We are producing more and more reports. We
yeah,
are such a research-rich community. World over, there's so much work happening in this sector.
yeah,
You just have to take one visit outside the house, and walk outside your gates of the gated community to see
yeah,
what the reality is. And then you wonder that obviously there is something very basic which needs a little tweaking because otherwise things aren't going to change. The decade of action and 2030 agenda and everything is going to come and go, but we're not going to see a lot of difference on ground.
true, true. And that again, every big organization, small organization is pushing for sustainable, resilient, inclusive. And for me that's more like sometimes these are parts of words which are just we just keep on repeating such stuff and don't do as much as we should do about it. And with children, while they are young, they are talented, we don't recognize those things. So how can that be tapped into this kind of ecosystem? So what is the kind of processes do you follow to make sure that okay, they you get enough output out of it that you can give it back to them?
Very good question, Puneet. A very good question. So, what's been happening is that when we decided to take on this project, this was my dream project. The funding was coming
Yeah,
for something else, and I said, no, this is my dream, and no one's going to fund this dream, and this is really what I want to do. And we had a fantastic collaborator when they said, okay, go for it, right? Because
yeah,
their mandate was marginalized communities, resilience. This is part of the Stockholm Resilience Center.
yeah,
So they kind of said, okay, if you want to work with children, you want to work you want to work, go ahead. So I felt that one of the modus operandi that we adopted was working with an organization. So we actually collaborated with the organizations across Ankur that works with children, Care Earth that looks at ecology, Beyond Build that looks at design, and Nidhi Madan was a very close, like we work very closely within Beyond Build.
huh,
We started looking at how children firstly perceive their environment. So if we're looking
okay,
at urban flooding, how
hmm,
are they looking at flooding? Because it's their houses that get swept off.
yeah,
It's their roofs that are getting damaged. They're writing stories about the drip
yeah,
and the dampness that they live with.
yeah,
But they're also writing about the dry periods. They're writing about, they made a vocabulary of vessels that they use to store water when it's dry every time the tanker comes. So there's a
yeah,
lot of, so here as a planner, one is trying to understand their their understanding of their environment. So that's number one.
yeah,
Number two is, I think one of the very important solutions, we're talking of nature-based solutions a lot these days.
yeah,
But as a cultural heritage professional, I'm talking about nature and culture-based solutions.
hmm,
So, one or two very important culture-based solutions within, let's say, the Indian environment, a
hmm,
large part of the traditional environment in Africa, is about jugaad,
yeah,
right? And jugaad is about really using the material that is around you to create something larger.
yeah,
And I think that's something that we are really working with and innovating on, because we have a problem in India, which is a lot of dumping in the urban environment, dumping
yeah,
of various kinds, waste, solid waste management, right?
yeah,
And then we have a paucity of material.
yeah,
These children or their parents or these communities within the squatters and slums cannot necessarily use, or buy materials to like build new houses or do
hmm,
repairs, etc. So we are working with the whole concept of jugaad. We are working with the whole concept of reusing waste, right?
yeah,
We are so in the urban environment, looking at the problem itself being a potential. And this is where
hmm,
Nidhi is really working very hard.
hmm,
And then we are working with how we can work with the children. I'm very nervous about the words capacity building and training, and because I think the children have a lot more
yeah.
to teach us than them, to be honest.
True, I agree.
When you work with children, you need a certain humility. So I
Yeah,
think how we can have an exchange with the children to use these methodologies of construction, of environmental orientation, of cleaning up the water systems, etc., starting from them and their immediate environment.
yeah.
So I think there is that's where the exploration and experimentation is.
True. I absolutely get that point. But then coming to the next part of this is on the lines that we when we are talking about this and we have talked about safety couple of times already, how do they perceive it? Because I think that is where we might also be getting it wrong somewhere, how to provide safe neighborhoods at the end of the day. So what is their thought process on those lines?
It's interesting. The children have not. I think it's interesting because the children haven't really brought out the safety issue in a big way.
Okay.
They are very beautifully connecting where they live in a squatter in the city
Yeah.
with how their village is, right?
Okay.
So they talk about the open space in a particular way. They talk about farming. They talk about what they are drinking and eating. They're talking
Hmm.
about how they are playing or how they are studying or the terrace. the terrace as being that open space which gives them the freedom to explore. So I think that safety is not being addressed as a safety thing, because I think that's again an adult orientation, that don't go here because this is not safe. Don't
Hmm.
do this because that's not safe. Children in general are have a certain bravado to them.
True.
I'll give you a small example. I live in Stockholm, and
Yeah.
I've been wondering why there are no railings here, because it's a set of islands, right? It's an
Yeah.
archipelago with water.
Yeah.
There are no railings. So I have seen toddlers age 2, 3 on roller bikes at the edge of a water system with no
Yeah.
parent running and trying to reach out to grab them back. And I've
Okay.
been, while doing this project in India and living in Stockholm, I've been trying to see that we'll always go and grab our child to bring him back from an unsafe environment. It could be unsafe in various ways.
Yeah.
So, what I'm realizing is that here in Sweden, they'll teach the children to swim very
Yeah.
early. It's mandatory. It's
Okay.
mandatory that the child learns to swim very early. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's a policy. You have to do it.
Okay.
And they're not worried when the child goes into the water, because they're more equipping the child to get out of the water,
Okay.
right?
That's
They know the child will go into the water at some point or the other.
yeah.
In our cities, when we're talking about safety, right? I think there are safety is a very deep conversation. Safety has a very important gender aspect to it, which maybe in a short discussion we may not be able to address. And I wouldn't say I'm the expert. The only expertise I have
Yeah.
is that I'm a woman, an
Yeah.
Asian woman, living in a Western environment, as well as from an Indian environment, and there's a different definitions of safety in both. So I think from a child's perspective, there is a certain need to be free,
Yeah.
and somewhere it's linked to safety in a very sort of a subtle way. It's more that freedom to be themselves, to do what they want to do, to roam, to play, and so on and so forth. So I think that is a how I see, or how I see them seeing it. But again, I
It's
don't know how they see it, to be honest.
I do feel it's a complex thing for us to understand everything that they are saying as well, and to infer something out of it. But then again, on some similar lines, I would like to understand one more basic thing is about jobs for their parents, that they do understand at certain point these people bring us food somehow. That is my concept as of now. As an adult, I'm thinking that. But how do they see economic activity in that perception, that what is going on around them?
So it's very interesting. Again, because the mandate of the project was more to do with the environment, we
Hmm.
started picking out adults in their environment whom
Yeah.
they could sort of interview. Okay,
Okay.
whom they could maybe in the longer run. The my Ankur team, Sharmila ji and Prabhat ji, came up with this brilliant idea that they could even intern with,
Hmm.
to understand what kind of jobs there are. And I think it's important for us to revisit the aspirational culture we have set up of sitting in an office the way you and me are doing,
Yeah.
and having this job that we think is really important. Whereas to me now, the understanding is the only job that is important is when you can use your self and your skills and your faculties and your hands to actually carve something out, create something. That's the most
Yeah.
important job, because that's the job which is going to be in peril in the future, right?
Yeah.
So it's about changing the aspiration of the next generation to understand that upskilling or skilling or job creation, it delinking it from this sitting in the office and doing this very important job, right? So we
Yeah.
started thinking that how can they work with, so we chose people who were making a difference in their environment. So let's say we chose the kabadi wala.
Hmm.
Okay. And we started, it was, I've been teaching in the School of Planning and Architecture as a guest faculty. I've taken my students to a lot of slums. We've looked at Kabadiwala areas. We've looked at how they collect, but we've never looked at it from someone who lives in that neighborhood and who sees very closely
Hmm.
what the gentleman is doing, and so they started looking at vocabularies, nomenclatures the kabadiwala was using for different waste.
Huh.
So they started understanding waste in a depth. Because the one thing that I wanted to say was that culturally, um, India has always been one of the most sustainable cultures in the world. And
Yeah.
any Indian who goes out and lives elsewhere can feel that, because you're just not able to throw. You're
True.
just not the culture that is taught to waste, scrape food, throw things. You will always find an alternative place and use for it.
Yeah.
And it's so deep in your psyche, culturally, that the dumping grounds that we see, we call them problems of solid waste management. But a lot of times it is many other things at a cultural level. So that's
Yeah.
why I feel that the solution that we have to bring out has also got to be from within our culture. So that is why we chose the Kabadi Wala as a possible economic or an occupational option for these children. We thought
Hmm.
maybe they can actually do an internship. There was a young girl who was interviewing this gentleman, and she wrote a
Yeah.
beautiful line where she said, when he's unwell, all time stops because the waste is waiting to be segregated. It still lies in its corners, waiting for this gentleman to come and put them in their right places. So it was a
Wow.
very beautifully poetic thought that this child brought out, right?
Yeah.
Another adult, in terms of occupation, they saw was a lady who had taken a patch of land and created a nursery out of it,
Hmm.
right? From
Yeah.
nothing. He just created a nursery where people from around that basti were coming to buy seeds and plants and things for their pots. Then they found another occupation, which was the guy who was selling water in the summer.
Yeah.
And they were questioning then in the stories, how come when we come from our villages where water is completely available, that we have to buy water in the city?
Yeah.
So their parents are the backbone of our society.
True.
And COVID has actually taught us that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? That we exist because they are with us. So they
True.
do understand the link between the economic activity and the food being brought, but maybe not in a theoretical way. They know that the dad, if he doesn't, a mother doesn't earn, there is nothing to eat that night. So it's a
Yeah.
very real link. So,
Yeah. And it's fascinating to see how these things are interrelated. But again, these are all fields of science as adults we see as different. And these are not like something that, okay, you just do everything together. You have a particular field for every of these things separately. So how do we, try and map it out so that as a generalist over here, that because you can go in depth at in science point of view, but at a as a generalist level we still have to bring it as one solution. So how do we proceed towards that?
okay, that's a very interesting and a very tough question, because that's pretty much what my whole exploration in my professional life has been.
Okay.
So I do feel that the next decade
Yeah.
is a time for generalists. But
Okay.
I don't think we understand generalists in a very. I mean, my understanding. I can share my understanding of what I think a generalist is.
Yeah.
So I feel that um, once you have been an expert at something
Hmm.
or an expert at certain things, you
Yeah.
now need to look at collaboration if you want to bring about a change, because it's very
Hmm.
simple. Any example you look at the five fingers of the hand, you look at any team, one member, one expertise, one silo, one background, one science, one social stream
Yeah.
will not make a change. It will not make a difference. It has not made a difference. you know uh, we have the results in front of us, and we
Yeah.
are either ready to see those results and face the reality, or we feel that it'll all all be fine. We just continue doing what we are doing. So I think continuing doing what we're doing, it was a decade or 2 decades of expertise building that we worked on. We were always told be a professional, choose one profession, stick it out, don't. I think that time is gone.
Yeah.
That time is, I mean, to me, it's gone a long time back. We're just not ready to face it. The time now is, firstly, to collaborate. In order to collaborate, you need to communicate. I don't think communication is easy because even on a simple project where we were with people from a science background, ecologists, we were with people who were primarily in the social sciences background or social workers essentially. And then we as designers, planners, environmentalists, landscape architects, we
Yeah.
weren't speaking the same language. So what did
Yeah.
we agree to tell the child or hear the child? That's why we said, okay, we are going to all keep quiet because we'll just now listen to what the child has to say.
Yeah.
And then taking a cue from there, which part does a landscape architect work on in this public space?
Mm.
Which part is the ecologist coming in? Which part is a social worker coming in? We all start working together to make a
Mm.
difference. And it's not an easy start. And the importance, I always look at a generalist versus a specialist from the medical profession.
Mm.
Every time we have a heart problem, we'll go to the cardiologist,
Yeah.
right? Now, we know that the cardiology problem might actually be created by the environment,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
you can't look at your heart in isolation from the environment, the air pollution, the water pollution, the food you're eating.
Yeah.
You just there is no now that time is gone where you can separate these things out. So the cardiologist has to work with the pollution experts, the resilience experts. We all have to work together and then start finding the solutions. And those solutions, we have to keep our children, their faces in front of us. We're not doing it
Yeah.
for ourselves because our time is going to go without in the blink of an eye.
True.
And any difference we want to make will probably happen in the next 30, 40, 50 years.
True.
So I think it is, I do think that we really have to move in that direction. Instead of generalist, I might call it collaborative. But
And collaboration is something. So we have so I have been working as a fellow at Smart Cities Mission prior to joining CQ, and that was one of our key objectives as well. How do we call it again a bigger word and jargon we use as quadruple helix? That how do we bring different stakeholders of government, academia, citizens, and industries together? But when we look at it, when we went on ground and talked to everyone, that was the communication point, as you pointed out, was one of the most difficult things to track, as that becomes something so everyone talks in a different language. How do you make one language for them to make sure that okay, everything kind of works together to develop a solution? And then again, delegating the task thing comes into picture. But I do agree that collaboration and communication are important points to it. And so coming towards the next part is on the line that you have yourself started as a landscape architect, and you are now designing such ecosystems. Like I can probably say it broadly. So how did that journey happen? How so that has gone from more aesthetic to more integrated holistic design, I would put it. I don't know, like I'm not from planning background, but I would just think of it as that uh, it has gone more from aesthetic towards more holistic systems. So how that has that journey evolved over time?
so I think the starting to that journey was being brought up in a family that allowed you to be yourself. Because I don't think if I asked my parents, they would have ever, they would know about the professions we've chosen. I mean, literally. So that freedom of choosing what you want to do, I think, has been a very important part of this evolution of not defining yourself by your profession,
Hmm.
defining yourself by how you want to make a difference,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes you can make a difference as being a landscape architect, and sometimes you put on another hat and you can make a difference as a heritage conservationist. So family, I think, and that belief that you're here to make a difference, and you can make a difference, is a starting point.
Yeah.
The second was I fell into a bachelor's degree. I say completely fell into it because my
Okay.
brother was from the School of Planning and Architecture, and he's a
Huh.
resilience person.
Yeah.
And I got into a course, which was a new course called Physical Planning, which was
Hmm.
8 semesters of something completely different. It was
Okay.
environmental planning, it was traffic and transportation planning, so heritage, design, housing. So what happened was you went through 8 semesters of completely so-called unrelated subjects,
Yeah.
theory and practice in studio. And so you saw a lot more very early in your career or very early in your educational background. You know, we were going to slums, then we were going to make regional plans somewhere, then we were doing housing in a locality, then we were designing a house for an artist. So it was a completely random, multi-layered sort of also helping not define what you want to be. You know, like a liberal arts degree, which most parents want today, that have a very open bachelor's degree and then keep figuring out what you want to specialize in. So I
Yeah.
think that was a very important key point for where I find myself today.
Yeah.
I soon found out I wanted to do the work on design and the environment.
Hmm.
The only option was landscape architect. So while I was working as a landscape architect, I started falling in love with storytelling through design.
Okay.
I started realizing that spaces, people, communities have stories.
Yeah.
And my role in that whole thing is when we talk about design concepts and was bringing out that story and using it to create something and then
Yeah.
seeing it through. So you actually built that story. And that awakening that you were actually building something and seeing it emerge probably was one of the most powerful points in my life. And I see that landscape architects uh, will be the new leaders in public space and city building in the future, you know.
Hmm.
So it wasn't really aesthetics that I defined the profession of landscape architecture as, because I think that's maybe how it's practiced in parts of India, but that's not
Yeah.
how landscape architecture really is. Landscape architecture is about understanding land,
Okay.
understanding terrain, understanding water systems, you know. And then I went and did a degree after working as a landscape architect for 7 years or so. I started
Yeah.
working on heritage projects and I fell in love because I said,
Yeah.
here is where the story is so rich and
Yeah.
it can come through in design, that I went and did another master's in heritage conservation.
Okay.
And so somewhere I think I was just collecting some sort of an information set in my brain, because when
Yeah.
you go out in the field, when I do projects today, I don't think I can silo them as being projects in urban planning or landscape or heritage, because everything is together.
Yeah.
Everything is together. You know, I'll give you a small example of my bachelor's thesis. I was
Yeah.
working on urban villages.
Okay.
Okay. And I was with the Laldora concept of how that red thread is drawn, and then what happens inside, you sort of let it happen organically.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, so I looked at areas where brick kilns had come up. I looked at areas where industries had come up. I looked at areas where stone was being mined. And then
Hmm.
years later, I was working in an office which was in an urban village. So I lived in the urban village pretty much for 12 hours of the day to
Yeah.
experience how it was. You were in the most affluent neighborhood, but yet you were in an urban village. So what is
Yeah.
the word inclusive here? You know, it's bizarre, right? Because
Yeah.
there is no balance that we are imagining. There is no one language. When you say that bringing everyone as a stakeholder in one language, but there is no one language,
True.
you know. And so I think it's been a journey where now coming to that holistic has been happening. It's sort of happening. It's a process of it happening without me consciously realizing it. And today,
Yeah.
coming to an understanding that this design skill is also, I mean, design thinking is today being preached from Stanford to, I mean, you take
Yeah.
in any urban lab, you're talking about design thinking, right?
Yeah.
So, understanding that this is probably where we will be able to solve problems, scale up, but then we have to take that message to the children, right? Because in
Yeah.
Western environments, design education is part of their middle school education. They learn design in many schools from a very early age of 10 or 12. How do you
Yeah.
take that to our children of the slums and the squatters? Because they are basically designers by birth. Jugaad is in their blood.
Yeah. No, I see your point over there, and that is where. So generally, one of our final questions is what skill sets are required. But I would tweak it for you over here is what do you need as good skills to be a good designer? Uh, what are those couple of skills required which will make you a good designer or make me a good designer over here because I'm trying to learn from
So I will tweak the question a little further.
you. Sure.
I would say, what are the skills required for this industry that has
Hmm.
so far been concentrated on design skills? I would say, what is that the newer skill set
Huh.
that is required in the design industry in our cities? And I think
Yeah.
one of the most important things is to have an ear to the ground,
Hmm.
to be listening. I always say that designer that goes creating the same, where you can look and say, oh, this is this landscape architect's work or this architect's work, cannot be an evolved
Yeah.
professional, because every situation is different.
Yeah.
And you have to come in and listen to that situation, and no two projects can ever be remotely similar, even if they're two houses for two brothers built wall to wall,
Yeah.
right? So I think most important skill is to listen,
Yeah.
have the ear to the ground. I think the second skill, which is almost linked to this, is giving the respect to your client and understanding that the client is not going to be someone who earns more than you, is living in a better environment than you. Your client set is going to change. It's already changed. We are choosing maybe not to go there. The
Yeah.
clients today are the majority. And the majority today are the Indian public that don't have, the have nots or the marginalized. Those are your
Yeah.
new clients. And the moment you're faced with clients who are don't have the same degrees as you or the economic level as you, you have to remember that they may know much more about where they live and what they want than any of your degrees or your experience could have taught you. I think
Hmm.
that's a very important skill set to come in, because only then you set the ground for collaboration. You know,
Yeah.
so I think design is an automatic fallout. You obviously fell into the profession because you love designing. I love designing, but literally I've had to put that on the side, seeing that I can do something which maybe I need to do. That's my calling, where it is to link design to the reality of changing things on ground. So I think finding that mission and understanding, a lot of youngsters have come to me over the last many years and said, we can't look at these sustainable development goals because they are for big projects. How
Yeah.
do we contribute? And then I always tell them that everything you are doing, everything you're
Yeah.
doing is contributing to it. Until you don't internalize that, you will still remain a profession for the privileged, a
Yeah.
profession which is again associated with aesthetics. It is not a profession for the aesthetics. It's a profession for planning an inclusive city. It's a
Hmm.
profession that should take care that when there is flooding, the cycle of flooding and famine and flooding and drought, it's us. If we were doing the right job, I always say the medical profession would be without work.
Yeah. True. True. That's a beautifully answered question. I'll say that. Please do let us know if I have missed out of any point and you would like to cover it. We can surely take it up right now.
No, I think we are fine. I always like to end with a little anecdote. And I'll do the same out here,
Sure.
which is that I was organizing a stakeholder meeting for a set of government institutions. There were many stakeholders who were supposed to be called. And so the client set up this room, this fancy room and everything. And the first day, the multiple departments heads and their representatives came. The second part of the stakeholder meeting was meant to be with the community,
Hmm.
and no one came.
Hmm.
And we got a message that no one is going to come. They can't come.
Yeah.
They're busy and all sorts of things. So I ran into the deputy mayor's room and I said, "Is it possible for us to go there? Where the site is and
Yeah.
stuff." And no one's going to be there. Anyways, the long and short it is that very often we, in that looking for that one language, we create a space which is not where people may necessarily feel comfortable, either
Yeah.
coming to that place or opening up or having a conversation, starting a dialogue. So we went to these waterside steps and we sat there and while we were sitting there, a couple of us, people who were passing by kept joining the group. So you got your stakeholders, you got people from the community, from the, so many different levels of stakeholders.
Yeah.
And then sitting on the steps, it was, I still remember we all had to catch our flights back. It was dusk. We were going to be running in a little while. We started talking about that water system and the skyline.
Yeah.
And we started talking about how their own communities were actually creating the problem, but in a dialogue. And I
Yeah.
think I've taken that one stakeholder meeting with me.
Yeah.
And what is COVID doing? COVID is asking us to be outdoors. COVID is saying, have a distance. And I think just having that communication and collaboration in a space where everyone feels comfortable and safe,
Yeah.
I think that's the starting point of the dialogue, of bringing people together. So yeah, I'd just like to end with that. But it's been fantastic, Puneet. Thank you so much, and thank you to NIUA
Thank
for organizing, and
uh,
Mahesh for inviting too. So fantastic.
absolutely, and thank you for your invaluable experience sharing, because I think the closing remarks does resound with the kind of episode we had today. Thank you so much, and I look forward to. I hope that more people find about it and listen to it as much as possible.
Thank you, Puneet.
You have been listening to Understanding the Future podcast. To know more about Climate Center for Cities, check out our website www.niua.org/c-q. The show is conceptualized, produced, and edited by Punit Gandhi, Senior Associate at CQ. You can now subscribe to our podcast on your favorite channel, which can be accessed through the credits. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social media for more updates. Do share your reviews with us and help us spread the podcast to your friends and colleagues. Do write to us if you would be interested in learning about any specific topics. Thank you and stay tuned.